When a prominent industrialist is found murdered under suspicious circumstances, the first pieces of evidence send a chill through everyone in town. What seemed at first like a clear-cut tragedy quickly takes a sinister turn as hidden secrets unravel, revealing a dark truth that places an innocent father and his devoted daughter in unimaginable peril. This is a story of betrayal, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. The crisp morning air clung to the red brick facade of the Maxwell estate, a sprawling property that loomed over the small town like a silent fortress. It was the kind of place people whispered about, half in awe, half in resentment, because the owner, Howard Maxwell, had commanded immense financial power here for decades. His philanthropic gestures were legendary, but so were the rumors of intimidation and quiet backroom deals. Still, few ever stood up to him, not with the extent of his influence. On this particular morning, though, everything changed. A lone black and white patrol car pulled up to the estate's ornate iron gates. A jittery security guard had made the frantic call to the local police station after stumbling upon a sight that nearly turned his stomach. Howard Maxwell, unresponsive and covered in blood, sprawled on the marble floor of his foyer. By the time the authorities arrived, there was no question, the man was dead. An hour later, the small police department of Redwood Heights found itself in a whirlwind, phones ringing off the hook with anxious queries. Reporters somehow caught a whiff of a scandal, circling like vultures. The newly appointed district attorney, a politically ambitious figure named Robert Lewin, dashed to the scene. The old guard in town, used to Maxwell's money and power, murmured anxiously on the sidewalks. Speculation ran wild. That morning, in a cozy neighborhood just outside Redwood Heights' main thoroughfare, a teenage girl named Emma Malone was woken early by persistent pounding on the front door. Her heart lurched. It was not the gentle rap of someone stopping by for a polite chat. It was a firm, demanding knock. She sat up, blinking in confusion, quickly pulling on a robe. Emma was 17, with a slight frame and hair she often wore in a ponytail for convenience. She'd been up late the night before, studying for an upcoming quiz in her advanced math class. And now, here she was, startled and disoriented in the pinkish light of early dawn. Her father, John Malone, answered the door. Emma crept halfway down the stairs, peering over the railing to see who was there. She could barely make out the gravelly voice of a policeman, something about coming downtown for questioning. Her father's usually calm face looked stricken, and Emma felt her stomach drop. At first, she thought it must be a misunderstanding. They had the wrong house. John Malone was a hard-working handyman known throughout Redwood Heights for his honesty, craftsmanship, and kind heart. He was the last person anyone would think of as a criminal suspect. "Officer, there must be a mistake," Emma heard John say, his voice tinged with worry. But the police insisted. More voices, talk of probable cause, Mr. Maxwell's murder, need you to come with us now. It made no sense. Emma scrambled the rest of the way down and emerged into the living room just as the officers were about to lead her father outside. "Dad, what's going on?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. John looked at her with haunted eyes. "Emma, it's all right. I'll sort this out. They think I might know something about Howard Maxwell. I'll explain soon, honey." Confusion, disbelief, panic, they all tumbled in Emma's mind. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the officers. "My father is innocent. He didn't do anything. Why are you taking him?" One of the officers grimaced, as though sympathizing. "Miss, we just need him for questioning. We have reason to believe he may have been on Maxwell's property last night." Emma's father insisted. "I was there to fix a broken generator, that's all. He called me in the afternoon, said it was urgent." But the officers weren't swayed. "Sir, we have to take you in for further questions. We found evidence linking you to the scene. That's all we can say." Emma stood frozen as they gently but firmly placed her father in the patrol car. She wanted to scream, to protest, but all she could do was watch her dad vanish behind tinted glass. Moments later, the car disappeared around the corner. Emma stood on the front lawn, robe fluttering in the cool breeze, feeling utterly helpless. John Malone, the man who had raised her alone after her mother's passing, who had always taught her right from wrong, who had never so much as stolen a candy bar, was being treated like a criminal suspect. In the days that followed, Redwood Heights erupted with rumors. Howard Maxwell had been stabbed in his foyer, no forced entry, no obvious struggle, though a broken vase indicated a possible confrontation. Various items were missing, though the police wouldn't say exactly what. The news reported that John Malone's fingerprints had been discovered on the murder weapon, a kitchen knife presumably taken from Maxwell's own house. And, perhaps most damning, a large deposit had suddenly appeared in John's bank account, just the day after Maxwell's death. Emma's father insisted he had no clue how that money got there. Someone must have wired it in, John told the detectives during questioning, his voice hoarse and anguished. Check the source. This is some kind of setup. Why would I kill Maxwell? We had a professional relationship. I fixed things for him. He paid me fairly. That's all. But the authorities had a different narrative. They believed John Malone might have confronted Maxwell about something, or tried to blackmail him. Or perhaps he'd been running a scheme. The deposit, the fingerprints, John's presence at the estate the night of the murder, it was all too incriminating. District Attorney Robert Lewin, eager to prove his competence in a high-profile case, pushed for immediate charges. John Malone was arrested, charged with first-degree murder, and placed in jail pending trial. Emma, reeling from the shock, found herself alone in their small house. The phone rang off the hook, reporters looking for a scoop, neighbors asking questions. She retreated to her bedroom, hugging her knees, tears streaming down her face. How could this be happening? Her father, behind bars, suspected of murder? She knew, absolutely knew, he would never hurt anyone. The entire notion was absurd, but the evidence they claimed to have seemed damning. That night, Emma barely slept, nightmares flickering behind her closed eyelids. The next morning, a knock at the door startled her again. However, this time, it was no officer. It was Dorothy Pierce, a family friend who had known the Malones for years. Dorothy was in her early 50s, with a warm but determined gaze, her short hair flecked with gray. She had once worked as a legal assistant, though she'd left that field some years back. Still, her knowledge of the legal system lingered. She stepped inside, embraced Emma gently, and said, "I'm so sorry about everything. I know your father's innocent. Let me help." Emma, her voice ragged from crying, said, "They found so-called proof, Dorothy. Fingerprints on the knife, a deposit in his bank account. But none of it makes sense." Dorothy nodded, eyes narrowing. "It's too convenient. Too perfectly incriminating. I suspect there's more going on here than meets the eye. We need to figure out who actually killed Maxwell and why they're framing your father." Emma felt a wave of relief just having Dorothy there, someone who believed John's innocence as fiercely as she did. "Yes, but how?" Emma asked. "The police are convinced he did it. The DA's already posturing in front of the news cameras." Dorothy pressed her lips together. "We start at the beginning. I'll speak to your father's attorney. I'll see what's in the charging documents, then we'll do our own digging. Meanwhile, I want you to keep your chin up. Your father needs you to be strong." That day, Emma and Dorothy sat at the kitchen table, where John had once served pancakes every Sunday morning, and pored over every memory Emma could recall about her father's dealings with Howard Maxwell. She remembered how Maxwell had often called at odd hours for emergency repairs. Emma also recalled times her father came home uneasy, complaining that Maxwell seemed tense or secretive. "He had a lot going on, big business deals, that sort of thing," John would say. Emma also recalled a few cryptic references to Maxwell's powerful friends, city council members, judges, wealthy out-of-towners who would gather at the estate for lavish parties. None of that was, in itself, suspicious. Maxwell was a big name in Redwood Heights. Still, Emma sensed something darker swirling beneath the surface. If it weren't for the police fiasco, she wouldn't have recognized the significance at all. As Emma and Dorothy were sifting through old receipts and phone records, the doorbell rang once more. Dorothy answered, and there stood a man in a rumpled suit, eyes darting about like he was worried someone might be watching. He introduced himself as Henry Welch, a junior reporter from a local paper. He asked to speak to Emma. Dorothy, protective, said, "What do you need from her?" The man claimed he had information that might prove John's innocence if Emma was willing to share what she knew. Dorothy eyed him warily. "All right, but keep it brief." "Emma's been through enough," Dorothy said, stepping aside. Emma lingered at the threshold, uncertain. The reporter looked nervous. He claimed he'd stumbled upon some irregularities in Howard Maxwell's business dealings. He indicated that Maxwell had been entangled in a possible bribery scheme with local officials, though he had yet to publish anything for fear of retribution. "I think your father discovered something he wasn't supposed to," Henry Welch said, voice low. Emma's heart pounded. "Do you have proof of this?" The reporter shifted uncomfortably. "Not yet. I'm working on it. But there have been rumors for years that Maxwell was funneling money to certain people. I'm not sure who. Politicians, possibly a judge or two. If your father stumbled on that, he might have been framed for the murder. We all know Maxwell had powerful allies." Dorothy frowned. "Rumors alone won't help. We need something concrete." Henry nodded. "I'll keep digging. But you should be careful. If there's a ring of corruption here, they won't want the truth out." Then he handed them his card. "Call me if you learn anything. I want to help, but I have to watch my own back too." After he left, Emma sank into a chair. "This is bigger than I thought. My father wouldn't get himself mixed up in bribes. That's insane. But maybe he saw or heard something while working at Maxwell's property." Dorothy rubbed Emma's shoulder. "Let's keep an open mind. The more we find, the better chance we have of freeing your father." That night, Emma scrolled through local news forums on her laptop. She saw headlines screaming about the handyman killer and the murder of a titan. She read comments from people she knew by name, neighbors who speculated that John Malone must have snapped under financial stress. Others insisted John was the gentlest soul and would never commit violence. The swirling public debate stung Emma deeply. Even more painful was seeing pictures of her father under the word suspect. Determined not to let her emotions paralyze her, she saved some of the more relevant tidbits of speculation, hoping some clue might emerge from the chatter. The next day, Dorothy arranged to meet John's court-appointed attorney, a weary man named Phil Saunders. He had a decent reputation, but he worked 100 cases at once. Emma listened as Dorothy and Phil discussed strategy. Phil explained that the prosecution's evidence was pretty strong, and that District Attorney Robert Lewin was known for his aggressive approach. Emma realized they needed a more hands-on, investigative approach. Phil was already overworked and lacked the resources to peel back the layers of a possible conspiracy. Dorothy turned to Emma as they left the attorney's office, her eyes bright with determination. "Phil is going to do his best, but I think you and I might have to gather our own evidence," Dorothy said. Emma swallowed. "Where do we start?" Dorothy sighed. "We start with motive. If your father didn't kill Howard Maxwell, who did, and why?" They spent the rest of the week talking to anyone who might have known Maxwell well. They visited the old neighborhoods where Maxwell had done philanthropic work, speaking to recipients of his charity. Some insisted Maxwell was a saintly figure. Others, especially older citizens, hinted that they'd heard rumors of Maxwell's underhanded business tactics, how he twisted arms in City Hall and cultivated friendships with people in high places. One elderly woman insisted that Maxwell had effectively stolen her property through predatory contracts, leaving her almost penniless. She didn't have proof, but her tearful story stirred Emma's resolve. As the days turned into weeks, Emma's life took on a strange new rhythm. School in the morning, where she was bombarded by stares and whispers, but also some kind words of support, Then in the afternoon she would meet Dorothy to continue their quiet investigation. At night, she would visit her father in the county jail during visiting hours. Those visits were heartbreaking. John, in orange scrubs, would sit behind a plexiglass window, and Emma had to speak to him through a phone receiver. She saw how tired he looked, lines of worry etched into his face. And yet he always managed to force a reassuring smile. "How are you holding up, Emma?" he would ask, voice gentle but strained. She would press her palm to the glass, fighting tears. "I'm all right, Dad, but that's not important. We're working on proving your innocence. Dorothy's helping. We're looking into Maxwell's background." John blinked, something flickering in his eyes. "Maxwell? He was always hush-hush about his side deals, telling me not to pry whenever I worked on his estate. He had stacks of paperwork locked away in a private study. Once, I caught a glimpse of some documents referencing an offshore account, but I never asked. I figured it wasn't my place." Emma leaned forward, heart thudding. "Dad, is there anything else you remember that might be a clue?" John rubbed his forehead. "I can't say for sure. He had shady visitors sometimes, big shots from out of town. I recognized one man. Judge Addison. Remember him from that time you got a scholarship from the county? He was on the dais with Maxwell." Emma's brow furrowed. "Yes, I remember that day. Addison gave a speech about honesty and service." She snorted. "Guess he's not so squeaky clean if he was involved with Maxwell's shady deals." John nodded. "If Addison's in on it, who knows how deep it goes? Be careful, Emma. Addison's a powerful man, respected. If he's part of this, he won't want anyone snooping." Emma felt a chill, yet also a spark of determination. The next day, she told Dorothy about the judge. Dorothy's face darkened. "Addison is legendary in Redwood Heights for being beyond reproach. Nobody questions his decisions. If he's part of the conspiracy, that's a huge can of worms." Dorothy then made a call to an old contact of hers, a retired detective named Frank Daly. Frank had once worked in Redwood Heights but had left the force under suspicious circumstances, claiming corruption in the higher ranks. He answered Dorothy's invitation to meet for coffee. Emma joined them at a small cafe off a back street. Frank was a grizzled man in his 60s, wearing a battered leather jacket. He had a direct, almost intimidating way of speaking. After Dorothy explained the situation, Frank's eyes narrowed. "Judge Addison, eh? I've heard rumors. They say he's been pulling strings for decades. He grants rulings that benefit certain wealthy players, and in return, they reward him under the table. No one's ever been able to pin anything on him. He's a ghost when it comes to evidence." Emma felt a jolt of anger. "Then how do we expose him if he's so good at covering his tracks?" Frank shrugged. "That's the million-dollar question. My advice, look for Addison's weak spots. People who might have reason to flip on him. Keep an eye on financial records, property deeds, anything that could lead back to him. And watch your own backs. If Addison senses you're on to him, he might do something drastic." As Emma and Dorothy left the cafe, Emma's mind buzzed. If Addison was truly behind the frame job, it would explain a lot. The skillful forging of evidence, the willingness of the DA to press charges quickly, perhaps Addison and Lewin were allies, and the deposit in John's account, which seemed too professional to be random. She felt both fear and a burning need to push forward. Her father's life was at stake. In the following weeks, Emma neglected her own personal life, rarely seeing friends except in passing at school. She poured her energy into investigating, rummaging through old courthouse records with Dorothy. They found that Addison had presided over several cases in which Howard Maxwell's business associates were exonerated or given lenient sentences. There were patterns. Addison always had a plausible legal reason for his decisions, but it was suspiciously favorable to Maxwell's circle. The deeper they dug, the more it looked like Addison had a vested interest in Maxwell's deals. But none of this was smoking gun evidence, just a pattern of questionable rulings. In the meantime, District Attorney Lewin publicly announced that the trial date for John Malone would be set within a few months. Lewin promised a swift conviction, telling the press, "We have strong forensic evidence. We believe justice will be served." Emma practically spat when she heard him on television, sure that he was ignoring any possibility of a frame-up. To gather more leads, Emma and Dorothy began talking to Maxwell's former employees, the gardener, the maid, the driver. They found the driver in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a fearful man named Victor. Victor seemed reluctant to talk at first, but after Dorothy pressed him, he admitted that Maxwell had been planning to meet someone secretly the night he died. "I don't know who," Victor murmured, voice trembling. "Mr. Maxwell told me he had business with a powerful friend. He told me to take the night off, which was unusual. He never let me go early." Emma exchanged looks with Dorothy. "The night off, so Maxwell had a visitor?" Victor nodded. "Yes. And it was definitely after your father left. I saw Mr. Malone's truck pull out around 8. The meeting was supposed to happen later." Dorothy leaned in. "Why didn't you tell the police this?" Victor looked terrified. "Because I've seen what happens to people who get on the wrong side of Maxwell's circle. Even though Maxwell's dead, the rest of them might still come after me. I'm sorry, I can't get involved." Emma's pulse raced. "Victor, please, this could save my father's life." He shook his head vigorously. "I told you all I can. I'm leaving town as soon as I save enough for a bus ticket." Despite the frustration, Emma felt a flicker of hope. This was a crucial piece of evidence. Maxwell had a late visitor that night. That person could be the real killer. She was certain of it. They typed up an anonymous statement from Victor, but the police were less than receptive when Dorothy tried to present it to them. The detective on the case, Simmons, basically brushed her off. "Lady, we have forensic evidence that puts Malone there at the time of death. Some scared driver's testimony about a late visitor won't cut it in court. If the man wants to come forward himself, have him talk to me in person. Otherwise, it's hearsay." Emma left the station fuming. They won't even consider the possibility that Dad is innocent. Dorothy's jaw clenched. It might not just be stubbornness. If Addison has influence over certain officers, they might be steering the investigation to ensure a quick conviction. "Then we have to prove the existence of that late visitor ourselves," Emma said, voice determined. "Maybe we can find security footage from a neighboring property that shows someone else arriving at Maxwell's house after Dad left." They spent hours driving the winding roads near Maxwell's estate. They noted every security camera they could spot, on gates, on garage rooftops, on doorbells. They knocked on doors, politely explaining that they were seeking footage from the night of Maxwell's murder. Most people were reluctant to get involved, but a few were sympathetic. They handed over any recordings they had, if they existed. The process was time-consuming, sometimes humiliating. Emma lost track of how many times doors slammed in her face. Finally, a minor breakthrough. A family living 3 doors down from Maxwell had a camera pointed toward the street. The father of the household was tired of the rumors swirling about Redwood Heights, so he gave Emma and Dorothy copies of the footage. They combed through hours of nighttime recordings, their eyes sore from staring at a laptop screen. At last, they spotted something. Around 9:30 p.m., a sleek black sedan with tinted windows rolled quietly past. It was heading toward Maxwell's estate. 10 minutes later, it returned in the opposite direction, leaving. The license plate was partially obscured, and the image was grainy. But it was a lead. This had happened well after John's old pickup truck was recorded by the same camera leaving Maxwell's driveway at around 8:15. So who was in that sedan? Emma wanted to do cartwheels. This proves that someone else was there after Dad left. It's not conclusive, but it's something. Dorothy nodded. We need to identify that vehicle. If it belongs to Addison or one of his associates, that's our smoking gun. They took the footage to an old friend of Dorothy's who used to do video enhancement for the police department. He tried to clean up the license plate, but it was still too blurry to read fully. He extracted a partial, maybe the first 3 letters, XR. The rest was unrecognizable. They scoured the DMV database for black sedans with a license plate starting with XRG, but there were dozens of possibilities statewide. It was a narrow list, but not narrow enough. Meanwhile, tension ratcheted up in Redwood Heights. The public was clamoring for swift justice in Maxwell's murder case. The DA's office kept leaking details that pointed to John's guilt. Emma felt the hostility in the air. She avoided going to the grocery store because of the stares. Some parents whispered to each other at school events, telling their kids to keep their distance from the murderer's daughter. Still, Emma pressed on. She had no choice. One afternoon, Dorothy got a phone call from Henry Welch, the reporter who had visited them before. He sounded agitated, insisting they meet at a diner on the outskirts of town. Emma tagged along. When they arrived, Henry looked over his shoulder nervously, as though expecting to be followed. "I found something big," he said in a hushed voice. "I managed to track some of Maxwell's financial dealings. He had transactions with multiple shell companies. All roads lead to a single trust account, managed by a local bank known to be discreet. I can't prove it yet, but I suspect these shell companies funnel money to Judge Addison and others in power. One of the shell companies has a name referencing Addison's hometown. It's too much to be coincidence." Emma leaned in, heart pounding. "Can you trace it directly to Addison?" Henry shook his head. "Not without official subpoenas, which the DA sure won't issue if Addison is pulling his strings. But if we can get hold of those bank records or Maxwell's personal files, maybe we can link Addison to the bribes. That could blow the entire case wide open and free your father." Dorothy exhaled, glancing at Emma. "So we need to find Maxwell's personal files. The ones John mentioned might be locked away in his estate. But how can we get in there?" The reporter looked grim. "The estate is sealed, a crime scene. The police have likely taken anything they find relevant to the murder. But if there's a hidden safe or a storage area the police don't know about, it could still be there. Maxwell was known to keep a private storage locker somewhere in the city, rumor says. But no one knows where." Emma's eyes lit up. "If I can find that locker, maybe we'll find the records." Henry nodded. "Careful. You're not the only one who might be searching for it. People connected to Addison will want to destroy anything that incriminates them." They parted ways, and Emma felt an odd mixture of exhilaration and dread. She was just a teenage girl, yet she was wading into a quagmire of corruption. That evening, Dorothy and Emma brainstormed, sipping tea at Emma's kitchen table. They listed every clue that might point to Maxwell's secret storage locker. A few months ago, John had mentioned that Maxwell asked him to build custom shelves off-site, though John never said where. Emma vaguely recalled a conversation where her father complained about having to drive to the outskirts of Redwood Heights, near the industrial zone, to do some carpentry work. Could that be it? Emma rummaged through her father's truck, searching for old receipts or scribbled notes. In the glove compartment, she found a stained invoice detailing the purchase of lumber, addressed to Maxwell Storage Unit Project. The location read Gold Line Facility, an industrial area on the far side of town. Emma's heart soared. This must be the place. The next weekend, Emma and Dorothy drove to Gold Line Facility. It was a sprawling complex of identical storage units, each locked behind chain-link fences with barbed wire. A board attendant sat in a tiny booth at the entrance. Dorothy, feigning innocence, explained they were looking for a friend's storage unit but had forgotten the unit number. "Is there a Maxwell or an account under that name?" Dorothy asked. The attendant frowned. "We don't give out customer info. Against policy." Dorothy sighed theatrically. "Please, we drove a long way, and it's so urgent." Emma, noticing the faint smell of cigar smoke on the attendant's breath, discreetly pulled a small wad of bills from her wallet, money she had saved from tutoring gigs. She hated to resort to bribery, but time was running out. The attendant eyed the bills and licked his lips. After a glance around to ensure no one was watching, He snatched them and turned to his computer. "All right," he muttered. "Don't blame me if I get fired for this. I see a listing for Unit 34B. Rented for the past 6 years. It's in the far row." Emma's heart pounded. "Thank you." They headed to 34B, which was padlocked. Dorothy tried a few lockpicks she'd brought along, an old trick from her days working for a private investigator. After a tense few minutes, the lock clicked open. The metal door rolled upward with a grating sound. Inside, the unit was dark and dusty, cluttered with boxes, furniture, and a large wooden cabinet that seemed out of place in a storage facility. Emma stepped in, adrenaline surging. "It's so cramped. We need to search carefully." They flipped on their flashlights. Dorothy opened a few boxes, old ledgers, random knickknacks. Emma tried the cabinet. The first 2 drawers were locked. She jiggled them, searching for a hidden latch. She found one near the back, releasing a panel. Inside, to her astonishment, were thick folders labeled with dates and code words. She opened one, bank statements from an account under a shell company's name, XRG Holdings. Emma's breath caught in her throat. XRG, the partial license plate. This had to be Addison's or at least connected. Dorothy's eyes went wide. "This is it. This is proof. We have to get all this out of here." But just as they began to gather the files, they heard footsteps outside. Emma froze, heart hammering. Dorothy killed her flashlight. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied by hushed voices. They were cornered in the dark. Emma peered through a small slit under the storage door. She saw 2 silhouettes. One had a flashlight scanning the row of units. A gruff voice whispered, "The boss said to clear out Maxwell's unit. If there's anything left that points to Addison, we burn it." Emma's stomach lurched. Dorothy put a hand over Emma's mouth, motioning her to stay quiet. The men tried to open the door, but found the lock undone. They rolled it up partway. Emma and Dorothy crouched behind stacks of boxes, praying not to be seen. The men stepped inside, shining their flashlight around. "You see anything?" "Not yet." "Wait, check that cabinet in the corner. That's where Maxwell might have hidden documents." Emma clutched Dorothy's arm, panic surging. If these men found them, they would do more than just chase them away. She had no doubt they were here to destroy evidence, and possibly any witnesses. Dorothy raised a finger to her lips, signaling silence. The men approached the cabinet, shining the flashlight. One yanked open the drawers and swore under his breath. "It's empty. Someone took the files." Emma's heart leapt. She realized that in the darkness, they might not notice the folders she and Dorothy had carefully slipped behind some boxes. Maybe it looked to them like the cabinet was simply empty from the start. The other man growled. They couldn't have gone far. "Search the place." Emma watched in terror as the flashlight beam swung across the boxes just inches above their heads. It was only luck that kept them from being spotted. The men rummaged around, but Dorothy had guided Emma into a niche formed by stacked furniture, effectively shielding them. After several agonizing minutes, the men cursed and whispered to each other. "Let's get out of here. Whoever took the documents is long gone. We'll report back. Addison won't be happy." Emma tensed. The mention of Addison was the final confirmation. Addison's goons were here to destroy evidence. At last, the men retreated, rolling the storage door shut. Emma and Dorothy waited, breath held, until the footsteps faded. Dorothy cracked the door an inch and saw no one. They slipped out, trembling. Emma's legs felt like jelly, but the adrenaline forced her onward. "We need to get these files somewhere safe," she whispered. Dorothy nodded, eyes narrowed. "Let's make copies immediately. Then we'll see what we have." They lugged a cardboard box stuffed with the most incriminating folders to Dorothy's car. Driving away from the facility, they half expected to be followed, but it seemed the men had left. They found a 24-hour copy shop in a neighboring town. Under flickering fluorescent lights, they spent hours scanning and copying pages, hearts still racing from the close call. The documents told a chilling story. Judge Addison had been funneling money through shell accounts, likely as kickbacks for favorable rulings. Maxwell had served as Addison's business partner of sorts, facilitating bribes to city officials and even possibly blackmailing a few. The final entries hinted at a recent falling out between Maxwell and Addison. Maxwell had threatened to go public with Addison's role if Addison didn't comply with a demand of Maxwell's. That was the impetus for murder. Addison must have arranged Maxwell's demise, then pinned the blame on John Malone, who happened to be a convenient scapegoat. Emma's hands shook as she held the photocopies. Dad's name is nowhere in here. He was just an easy target. Dorothy's voice was grim. We have the proof that Addison and Maxwell conspired together. It's enough to cast serious doubt on your father's guilt. But Addison is powerful. He'll do everything he can to discredit this. Emma looked at Dorothy with fierce resolve. We have to go public. We'll show it to the DA, or we'll leak it to the press, or we'll do both. My father's trial is coming up soon. If we reveal Addison's crimes, the entire case could collapse. Dorothy nodded, though her brow furrowed. True. But Addison might move quickly to silence us. We should probably go to someone we trust first. They thought of Detective Frank Daly, the retired cop who hated corruption. He still had friends in law enforcement who might protect them. They contacted him in the middle of the night. He agreed to meet them at a discreet location, a bar on the outskirts, closed at that hour. Frank let them in through a side door and locked it behind them. Once they showed Frank the files, he let out a low whistle. This is dynamite. Addison can't squirm out of this easily. Emma clenched her fists. So we bring it to the DA, right? Lewin can't ignore it. Frank hesitated. Lewin's been cozy with Addison for years. If he's compromised, we might be handing Addison a roadmap to bury the evidence. But we could try going straight to the state attorney general's office or a federal agency. Dorothy bit her lip. That could take time we don't have. John's trial is imminent. We need to stop this train before it smashes him to pieces. While they debated, Emma's phone vibrated in her pocket. It was an unknown number. She answered tentatively, stepping aside. The voice on the other end was shaky, almost panicked. Emma Malone? This is Victor, the driver. I overheard something. They know about you, Addison's men. They're going to try something tonight or tomorrow to keep you quiet. Emma's mouth went dry. How do you know? I was at a bar. They were talking openly, thinking no one would hear. They said you got your hands on the evidence from the storage locker, and that Addison wants it destroyed, along with anyone who tries to use it. Emma's entire body felt numb. We'll be careful. Thank you. She hung up and turned to Dorothy and Frank, relaying Victor's warning. Dorothy's eyes flashed with fear. We need to protect ourselves and the evidence. If Addison's men come for us. Frank nodded grimly. I can reach out to some honest cops I know. We'll hide you in a safe place tonight. As for the evidence, let's make multiple copies. Send them to multiple sources. They spent the next few hours scanning and emailing the documents to carefully chosen people, an investigative journalist in a neighboring city, a federal oversight committee's tip line, and a well-respected judge known for integrity in the state's capital. By the time they finished, the sun was creeping over the horizon. Emma felt like she'd aged years in a single night. Sure enough, that very morning, a black SUV was spotted idling near Dorothy's apartment. A neighbor phoned to say two men in dark suits were asking questions about her. Dorothy and Emma remained safely hidden at Frank Daly's small ranch house, miles away. Frank's friend, Officer Garcia, one of the few on the local force not under Addison's thumb, parked her patrol car outside, serving as a visible deterrent. In the following days, Addison's troubles began to mount. The journalist who received the files started making calls, verifying details. A well-known morning talk show got wind of the story. Sensing the imminent storm, District Attorney Lewin tried to downplay rumors of corruption, but he couldn't stop the wave of leaked documents. Public outcry began to swell. Yet Addison wasn't finished. At John Malone's preliminary hearing, Addison tried to crush the new evidence by declaring it inadmissible hearsay. He insisted that the documents had been illegally obtained and had no direct bearing on the case. The presiding judge, an old colleague of Addison's, initially seemed to side with him. Emma watched in horror as they refused to even look at the files that exonerated her father. Dorothy and Frank glowered from the gallery. The attorney representing John was outgunned, flustered by Addison's cunning legal maneuverings. Leaving the courthouse, Emma felt defeated. How can Addison just bury the truth like that? Dorothy tried to console her. He's desperate. He might succeed for a while, but the tide is turning. Keep faith. Sure enough, the very next day, the out-of-town journalist published a scathing exposé detailing Addison's corruption and tying it to Maxwell's murder. The story went viral locally, then regionally. Furious calls poured into Redwood Heights City Hall, demanding an independent investigation. Addison, once revered, now faced intense scrutiny. People began stepping forward with stories of Addison's shady rulings. Even de Lewin started to distance himself, quietly telling the press he would review any credible allegations. Meanwhile, John Malone's defense team filed a motion to delay the trial, citing potential prosecutorial misconduct and conflicts of interest. Still, Addison was not about to capitulate easily. He used every legal trick in the book to stall the charges against himself. But with each passing day, more evidence trickled out. Frank and Dorothy discovered that Addison's name was listed as a co-signatory on one of Maxwell's shell accounts. That was the big one, unambiguous proof of Addison's direct involvement. As the scandal erupted, Addison himself vanished from public view. Some said he was holed up in his mansion, refusing all visitors. Others speculated he might flee the country. Tension in Redwood Heights reached a boiling point. This entire time, John Malone remained in jail, awaiting either trial or the recognition of the new evidence that would set him free. Emma visited him daily, her heart aching each time she saw how worn he looked. "Don't lose hope, Dad," Emma would say, pressing her hand to the glass. "It's all coming to light, I swear." John's eyes shone with gratitude, tears brimming. "I knew you'd clear my name, Emma. You're so strong. Your mother would be proud." Emma blinked back tears, longing to hug him, but the glass barrier remained. "We're close, Dad. Just hold on." Amid the turmoil, Addison's longtime clerk, a nervous man named Paul Merriweather, came forward unexpectedly. He reached out to Dorothy, claiming he could offer more damning evidence. Emma and Dorothy met him in a public park in broad daylight. Merriweather trembled as he told them Addison had forced him to falsify court records and sign secret documents funneling money to Maxwell. Addison had once threatened Merriweather's family if he ever talked. "How can I be sure you'll protect me?" Merriweather asked, voice quavering. Dorothy said, "The best protection you have is to go public fully. Once your statements are out there, Addison can't silence you without making it even more obvious." Emma gently touched his arm. "Please, we need your testimony to save my father. And to stop Addison from ruining more lives." Merriweather nodded miserably. "I'll do it. I can't live with this guilt anymore." Within a day, Merriweather's videotaped deposition was aired on the local news. He explained in detail how Addison orchestrated bribes, how Maxwell's murder was likely a direct result of a power struggle between the two men. Addison had even bragged that pinning it on some lowly handyman would be child's play. The public outrage skyrocketed. People began calling for Addison's immediate arrest. The final blow came when a special prosecutor from the state attorney general's office arrived in Redwood Heights, announcing an official inquiry into Addison. The special prosecutor demanded Addison turn over all financial records, and a team of state investigators raided Addison's office, seizing computers, documents, and personal files. At last, the Redwood Heights judicial system began to shift. The new judge assigned to John Malone's case reviewed the evidence from the storage locker, along with Merriweather's deposition. The judge reversed the prior ruling that had deemed the evidence inadmissible, calling it absolutely relevant and credible. District Attorney Lewin, scrambling to save face, dropped all charges against John Malone, pending further investigation. Emma was in the courtroom for the announcement. When she heard the judge declare John a free man, her knees nearly buckled with relief. In the gallery, Dorothy squeezed Emma's hand, tears streaming down both their faces. John Malone was brought in from the holding area, still wearing his prison jumpsuit. The judge stated that the prosecution was dismissing the case against him. Cheers erupted among the onlookers. Emma dashed forward the moment the bailiff removed John's handcuffs, throwing her arms around her father, sobbing into his shoulder. "Dad, you're free," Emma whispered, hardly believing the words. John's voice trembled with emotion. "Thank you, Emma. You saved me. You never gave up." Their embrace lingered, father and daughter clinging to each other after weeks of nightmare. Dorothy joined them, hugging John as well. Reporters snapped photos, broadcasting the emotional scene across the region. Outside the courthouse, curious onlookers watched as John Malone stepped into the sunshine for the first time as a free man since his arrest. The weight of the ordeal still clung to him, but the rays of hope were undeniable. In the ensuing days, Redwood Heights was engulfed in the fallout of Addison's downfall. With the documents from Maxwell's storage unit and testimonies from people like Merriweather, Addison was indicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Additional conspirators emerged: real estate magnates, corrupt officials, a few high-level cops. The whole system Addison had built for decades began to crumble. John Malone quietly tried to return to normal life, though it wasn't easy. He was traumatized by his time in jail, haunted by the knowledge that he'd been so casually thrown to the wolves. The community, embarrassed for how quickly they'd vilified him, began to rally around him. Neighbors dropped off food, apologized for believing the worst. Local businesses offered him work. Emma watched her father accept these gestures with humility, but also a sadness that suggested the wound ran deep. During a small welcome home gathering at their house, people came to pay respects. Dorothy was there, along with Frank Daly, Henry Welch, and even Officer Garcia, who had helped guard them. Emma looked around the living room, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in ages. Despite everything, they had come out stronger, forging bonds that might never have existed otherwise. When most of the guests had gone, Dorothy leaned over to Emma and said, "You know, you changed this town forever. You exposed a snake pit of corruption." Emma shrugged, blushing. "I just wanted to save my dad." Dorothy smiled gently. Sometimes that's exactly how big change begins, with personal stakes that drive someone to do what's right. Later that evening, John sat with Emma on the porch swing, a soft breeze rustling the trees. The sky was streaked with pink and orange as the sun set over Redwood Heights. They listened to the distant hum of traffic and the faint chirping of crickets. For a few moments, they said nothing, just enjoying the peace. Finally, John spoke, voice low and reflective. "Emma, everything you did, risking your safety, digging up evidence, never losing faith in me, I don't know how to thank you." Emma slipped her hand in his. "You don't have to thank me, Dad. You're my father. I knew you were innocent. I'd do anything to protect you." He smiled sadly, eyes shining. "I wish your mother were here to see how strong you've become. She always said you had a fighting spirit." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, thinking of her mother, lost years ago to an illness. "Sometimes I felt like she was guiding me," Emma said softly, "especially on those nights when fear almost took over." John nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I felt the same way locked in that cell. I prayed, remembering all the lessons she taught us about perseverance. I never gave up hope that you'd find a way." They sat there for a while, letting the emotions settle. Then, as the first stars twinkled overhead, John cleared his throat. "We should do something with all that evidence, you know. More than just exposing Addison. Maybe set up a foundation to help those who were victimized by Maxwell's or Addison's corruption. Emma's eyes lit up. That's a great idea. We could use any restitution Addison is forced to pay. Help families who lost their homes, their pensions, or who were framed like you. John squeezed her hand. Yes, let's do that. Turn this tragedy into something that helps others. In the coming months, Addison's trial captured national attention. The once fearsome judge, cornered by insurmountable evidence, tried to claim he'd been blackmailed by Maxwell. But witnesses, paper trails, and the broader conspiracy pointed directly at Addison's greed. He was found guilty on multiple charges, sentenced to a lengthy prison term. De Lewin, implicated as well, quietly resigned in disgrace. The city council declared a day of reflection, vowing to enact reforms to prevent another Addison from rising to power. The scandal left Redwood Heights shaken, but it also brought a sense of renewal, like a weight had been lifted from the city's collective conscience. For Emma, returning to school life felt strange at first. Classmates who once whispered about her father now regarded her with respect, even awe, for her courage. Teachers who had known her as a bright but quiet student marveled at the transformation. She graduated that spring with honors, delivering a valedictorian speech that touched on truth, justice, and standing up for what's right. As she spoke, John sat in the front row, tears of pride in his eyes. Dorothy was beside him, smiling through her own tears. Soon after, Emma and John joined forces with a group of local activists to launch a non-profit organization aimed at legal advocacy, focusing on wrongfully accused individuals. They named it the Malone Foundation, in honor of the ordeal that nearly destroyed them but ultimately made them stronger. Dorothy served as a consultant, offering her legal expertise. Frank Daly became an unofficial advisor on investigations. Together, they worked to champion the causes of those who couldn't defend themselves. In Redwood Heights, a new generation of civic leaders emerged, inspired by Emma's fight for her father. One day, about a year after John's exoneration, father and daughter revisited the Maxwell estate. The property had been auctioned off to new owners with no connection to Addison or the old circle of corruption. Emma and John stood at the edge of the lawn, gazing at the imposing structure in the distance, remembering the horror that began here. It felt surreal to see the place that had once overshadowed the entire town, now so peaceful under the midday sun. John exhaled slowly, turning to Emma. It's strange, isn't it? How something so dark can lead to so much light eventually. Emma reached for his hand. We turned it around, Dad. We found the truth. He nodded, a gentle smile curving his lips. Yes, we did. They walked away, the estate shrinking behind them, replaced by the vast horizon. Emma felt a cool wind stir her hair, a reminder of the constant change that life brings. She knew the memory of Maxwell's murder and the subsequent upheaval would never fully fade, but it no longer felt paralyzing. Instead, it stood as a testament to the power of perseverance and love, two forces that no bribe or conspiracy could ever fully suppress. In the months following Addison's conviction, Redwood Heights moved forward with a sense of cautious optimism. Cases handled by Addison were re-examined. Some convictions were overturned. The press referred to it as the Addison Purge. Henry Welch, the reporter, won an award for investigative journalism. He credited Emma, Dorothy, and Frank for risking everything to uncover the truth. The city council, under new leadership, passed ethics reforms, banning private funding of elections for judges, a direct response to Addison's manipulations. John, coping with the aftereffects of his time in jail, found solace in helping other exonerees who had been wrongfully accused. He often gave talks at community centers, telling his story, emphasizing how a single piece of planted evidence can destroy a life. At these events, Emma would stand by him, sometimes adding her own voice. It wasn't easy revisiting the trauma, but they saw how their story inspired others to be more vigilant against corruption. At last, life settled into a semblance of normalcy. Emma began college at a nearby university, majoring in sociology with the dream of pursuing law school. She wanted to dedicate her life to preventing miscarriages of justice. In her dorm, she kept a small framed photograph of her father, free and smiling, on her desk, a constant reminder of what was possible when one refused to back down in the face of adversity. One day, near the end of her first semester, Emma returned home to visit John. They spent a quiet evening cooking spaghetti together in their modest kitchen, just as they had in simpler times. With the sauce simmering, Emma set the table, glancing around at the small but cozy home that still felt like a sanctuary. "Dad," Emma said, stirring the pasta, "I was thinking about how far we've come. Remember that morning I woke up to find the police taking you away?" John nodded, his voice gentle. "I remember it all too well." Emma continued, "Sometimes it feels like a bad dream, but then I look at where we are now. You're free, Addison is in prison, and Redwood Heights is slowly healing. It's like we defeated a monster." John's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. "We did. But monsters often hide in places we least expect, behind respectable titles and benevolent smiles. What you did, was pull back the curtain." They served the dinner, sitting across from each other. The steam rose in gentle wisps from their plates. Emma took a bite, savoring the rich tomato sauce. "I'm proud of us, Dad. We didn't let fear stop us." He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You were my light in the darkness. Even in jail, I'd think of you, my fearless daughter, and I'd know we'd find a way." They ate quietly for a moment, content in each other's company. Then Emma spoke again, voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm not done fighting injustice. Once I finish law school, I want to keep the foundation going, expand it. Maybe offer legal aid to others across the state. If Redwood Heights needed a wake-up call, imagine how many other places have their own Addisons." John nodded solemnly. "The world needs people like you, like us, to hold the powerful accountable." After dinner, they cleared the dishes. Emma stepped outside for a moment, gazing at the star-drenched sky. A sense of peace washed over her. The nightmares of Addison's threats, the clang of jail doors, the bitterness of the town's gossip, they lingered as memories, but they no longer controlled her. She breathed in the cool night air, feeling gratitude for the resilience she and her father had found in one another. The next morning, John drove her back to campus. The moment they pulled up in front of her dorm, Emma gave him a tight hug. "See you soon, Dit. And remember, if you need anything with the house or the foundation, call me." He patted her back affectionately. "I will, sweetheart. You just focus on your studies. We have plenty of time to change the world." They parted with a smile, each bearing the scars of the past but also the hope for a brighter future. The Addison scandal became a fixture in Redwood Heights history. The local museum even added a small exhibit dedicated to the event, labeling it, "The Corruption Unveiled." While some found it too recent and raw, others believed it was vital to remember the darkest chapters to avoid repeating them. And so Emma Malone continued her journey, shaped but not broken by the storm that had threatened to tear her family apart. The files from Maxwell's storage locker, the whispered warnings, the near misses with Addison's men, those memories propelled her forward. Every time she reviewed a case study in class or engaged in a debate about justice and ethics, she recalled standing outside the jail, vowing to prove her father's innocence. That vow had become the cornerstone of her life, a testament to what love and determination could achieve against all odds. She thought of Judge Addison sometimes, rotting in a cell, stripped of his power, pondering the consequences of his hubris. Emma felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that he could no longer harm anyone. In the end, Redwood Heights, and the entire region, had witnessed the unmasking of a corrupt system and the triumph of truth. And through it all, father and daughter had found their deeper calling: to defend the powerless, to champion honesty in a world too often swayed by wealth and influence, and to remind anyone who would listen that real justice demands courage. a kind of courage they discovered in the darkest hours, in the unwavering bond of family and the unstoppable drive of a young woman who refused to let lies prevail. Thank you for watching, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Take care, and we'll see you next time.